Hi, my name is Steve Streetman. I'm from Bowie, Maryland, and I really got into real estate in 2004 as an investor. I became a real estate agent in 2009.
In your words, what's the difference between equity marketing, creative real estate, exchanging, whatever you want to call it, and conventional brokerage?
Well, equity marketing is fun. there's so many different ways to look at a project and a property, and I'm all about problem solving. So this is about problem solving. In fact, the way I got into the equity marketing side, there's a book out from the Rich Dad group called The Big Book of Real Estate, which an exchanger named Wayne Palmer had written a chapter in. And I was reading that book, and I got through that chapter, and I stopped right there, went to the website for the NCE, which he'd put into his chapter, and signed up for the next conference, because it was just such a cool idea. I couldn't imagine anybody was trading properties like baseball cards. Well, for exchanging, you're no longer limited to cash for a property, right? That's one way of doing it. One of our grandfathers here, Bob Steele, has written a book on 300 ways to exchange property, buy, sell, or exchange. And one of them is cash for property, or cash and get a loan for a property. But there's so many other things that you can do that actually help people better than just giving them cash. Often you get cash, you end up with tax issues, you end up with other kinds of issues of moving it around. Nobody really wants cash, they want what cash will buy. And so if you can solve the objectives better by doing exchange, why not do it? And then it also gets, like I said, it's a lot more interesting, it's a lot more creative. There's just all kinds of benefits to it. So exchanging is a very uncommon thing, especially in the East Coast where I am. Right? I'm the only member of the NCE within like 150 miles of where I am. So it's more of a Western thing. When you try to do this, you have to get people out of that mindset, which is the same mindset of I'm going to sell it for cash, and the only thing I want is cash. And so counseling is very important. You have to understand why they're selling, what they're trying to accomplish, and identify potential ways that they can accomplish that. You also have to understand what resources they can bring. Because often when someone isn't selling their property for cash, let's face it, it's because they can't sell it for cash. And so there's got to be some way to make that deal enticing to someone else. So is it that you can add money to it? Is it that you can add another property to it? Is it that you're willing to be able to be flexible in terms of what you accept? I mean, there's a whole bunch of different things that you can do to make that deal happen, which don't have anything to do with money or cash. And those things are the things that you have to open your clients' minds to. So the counseling is absolutely vital. No one's going to come in and look at this really weird offer if they haven't been prepped for it. And it's a waste of your time, and it's actually to some extent a betrayal of trust. If you have not counseled them to know that these are the kinds of things that you're likely to get as offers, then you really haven't done your job and done your fiduciary duty to your client. So counseling is vital. So I don't tend to work a whole lot with clients. I typically work as an investor for myself. But from what I've seen and from what I've heard, investors tend to be more creative than brokers. So I think if you have people who are doing investments, they're more likely to be able to come on board with this than other brokers. There's a lot of brokers who will think it's illegal to do this, or it's not the way it's done, or it's not what I was taught in my CCIM class, or whatever. So I suspect it's actually harder to get the investors on board, maybe until a downturn when it's really hard to move properties, and then brokers will be a little more desperate and a little more open-minded.
In markets like 2008 and stuff, it seems like a lot of smaller brokerages might go under, but if they understand this type of stuff, it might help them stay afloat. Do you think that's true?
Well, certainly in 2008, credit dried up completely, especially for commercial. In all large commercial, it was just gone. No one could get refinancing even if they had a good project. So what are you going to do? The only thing you can do is exchange at that point. So I mean, exchanging is necessary in a really bad, tough market. It's desirable in a really good market.
Do you feel like there's more camaraderie and teamwork in these rooms?
Yeah, because you always have multiple brokers involved in these deals. And in fact, it's not even just one or two. You might have 10 brokers involved in these deals if you have multi-leg exchanges. So it's all about cooperation, making sure everybody gets what their client needs. And there's a certain amount of cutthroat there, but you're also trying to come out with ideas. We'll sit in those meetings and we'll have people coming out with, well, hey, why don't you offer your property for him for that? He's helping to make that deal even though he won't get anything out of it, just because it's the right idea, it's the right approach. When you come to groups like this, that's true. Now, when they go back home and they're competing against each other in their same markets, is there that same camaraderie? I'm not really sure because I don't have any other brokers in my market. But I would say that the camaraderie is really good here because you need multiple people to make a deal. Investing is a team sport, as people like to say. I've started coming often enough now that I'm recognized. I'm not just, oh yeah, there's that guy from Maryland who comes occasionally, but I'm actually a player. I put in offers, I close projects, and so there's a very welcoming attitude for me to come in. I think they like to see an outside perspective. They like to see some things that aren't in their own geographical area. They like to see different kinds of properties. And so I find it's welcoming, and I do find that I'm now keeping in touch with people a lot more often remotely in between meetings to keep projects moving. And so yeah, I mean, I won't say I've made lots and lots and lots of relationships, but there are several really, really strong ones that I've forged. And there's a lot of people who I know enough to call when something's in their particular area of expertise.
Would you advise, maybe not all investors, but if you're working on your personal portfolio, so in essence you're investing in property, either lenders or investors, or would you say that it's lucrative for them to either, if they're brokers, to come or to send their broker here?
Yeah, I absolutely would advise people to come. If you're an investor, chances are pretty good, unless you've got a very specific niche and that's the only thing you do, there's only one place that you do it, and you're absolutely committed to that, you don't want to go beyond that. And there are investors like that. Unless you're like that, you want to be open to these opportunities. Because there's all kinds of things that you can diversify into, there's people that you can meet, there's potential partners that come on board because of all this that happens. You're kind of putting yourself out there in the world, and you get a lot of opportunities. I've gotten some opportunities I never would have gotten anywhere else that have been incredibly lucrative. They've made me lots of money, and especially if I close this next project that I'm under right now, I'll be generationally wealthy. So these opportunities have come to me through this group, and they wouldn't have come through any other group. Well, I mean, a couple of years ago, I actually traded land for cryptocurrency. And the deal I'm working on right now is trading cryptocurrency back into a cash flowing property after it is appreciated. So, once I trade that into the property, a few years later, I refinance, that comes out as cash. So now I've turned essentially vacant land into sort of an intermediate cryptocurrency piece into a cash flowing, well-recognized real estate asset back into cash. And it's going from a small amount to over $10 million. So it's quite, I'm quite excited about it.
Yeah, well, I can tell you're not fake smiling.
I come to these meetings, I get really energized because there's so many people thinking about so many different things. I can't possibly pursue all the ideas we come up with in the meetings. I just can't. There's too many. But even pursuing a fraction of them, I find that I'm ending up with more property, more equity in places I never would have dreamed of in some cases. And then that property leads into another property, and that goes somewhere else. It's quite an interesting journey. Well, and this is really unfettered capitalism. But the whole point is everybody who's involved in the exchanges win. They're all getting their objectives. That's how capitalism ought to be working. Well, the thing is that people have different objectives. If everybody had the same objective, which is what normal brokers assume. Normal brokers assume that all sellers are trying to get the most money for their property in the least amount of time. They assume that all buyers are trying to get pay the least amount of money for the property in the longest amount of time, maybe. And the fact is that's just not true. Some sellers, it's more important to walk away, just to get away from it, to get something off of their psyche. For some sellers, all they really want is an income stream instead of a management hassle. And unless you recognize that, you don't really solve the problem. You just push somebody into another property or you move them around and they end up with the same problem they had before, just with a different place.
And then I have one final question.
Sure.
Do you like your job?
So just for me, real estate is a part-time job for me. I also have a job where I do a sort of high-tech consulting computer modeling, which I enjoy as well. But I really enjoy doing the real estate as well. I enjoy the process. I enjoy the people that I'm working with. I enjoy solving the problems. And let's face it, in real estate, whoever solves the most problems does the best. So yeah, no, I actually really do enjoy it. When you have investors come in and turn a crappy property into a nice property, you've improved the whole neighborhood, right? And maybe the other person who owned it couldn't do that. They didn't either have the vision or the money to do that. Someone else comes in, they do that. If you have a broker that facilitates these sorts of exchanges, they're essentially solving problems for people. And it's not just the people they're related to. It's often problems from the neighborhood, problems for the city, problems for the state even in some cases. So you're solving problems, making the world a better place, really, as a broker.